This is a story of the Alter Rebbe's special mission when he went to the city of Shklov. The Mezritcher Maggid sent him there. He should go in a way that he does not identify who he is, and he can observe what they're doing and what they're planning and what they're saying. And also at the same time, he was able to influence them and bring them closer to Chassidus. It was a winter night in the month of Cheshvan. Outside it was very bad weather. In the shul, which was called the Shul of the Prussian, there was a guy, a very great Torah scholar by the name of Rabbi Yosef Kolben, sitting and learning Gemara. It was a tractate to the Masechta of Erchin, sitting and learning for many hours. This guy, this genius, Rabbi Yosef Kolben, was known in all of Lithuania, in Minsk, and also in the city of Vilna. When people spoke about him, they spoke about him with great respect. They gave him the title Marona V'Rabbona. Although he was still a young man, he was not even 40, yet everyone had the greatest respect for him, being that he was such a great Torah scholar. Rabbi Yosef Kolben was a person who was very strong-minded, and he was very well aware and conscious of his own greatness. And not only was he aware of his own greatness, he made sure to make other people aware of his greatness as well. And when he sat and studied Torah, you could see how much he felt himself and his greatness. He would sit and learn. First of all, when he gave a shiur, when he taught, nobody was allowed to interrupt him with any questions, unless he gave permission. Or finally, when he finished the whole shiur, only then were you allowed to approach him with questions. Rabbi Yosef Kolben used to learn loud, in a very excited manner. But when he studied, he would study in a way as if he's speaking to himself. And when he'd come across one of the Mefarshim, one of the commentaries, he would learn it as if he's talking to that person. So when he studied Rashi, you would hear him talking as if he was speaking to Rashi. And he would say, Rashi, I have a question on you. How could you say this here if you said something differently over there? And the same with Taisus and the other Mefarshim. It was all in a way that you can see the person felt his greatness, and he put himself as if an equal, as if he was on the same caliber of Rashi, the Rif, the Rosh, and all these other great Torah giants. That night, when Rabbi Yosef Kolben was sitting and studying, in walks this young man with a sack on his shoulders, walks over to the oven to warm up a little bit. Obviously, he was very cold and very tired from his trip. Shortly after that, Rabbi Yochanan Dov, who was known as Rabbi Yochanan Dov the fisherman, walked over to him, gave him Shalom Aleichem, and he asked him, of course, if he has what to eat. And also, he was going to test him where he stands in terms of his Torah knowledge. The reason being that Rabbi Yochanan Dov himself was a great Torah scholar, but he excelled in Achnasas Orchim. He loved to have guests, and he had a special place in his heart for guests that were Torah scholars. In his house he has a room, which was a special room designated only for Torah scholars. This Rabbi Yochanan Dov, as we said before, was a fisherman. He would catch fish, sell fish, but whenever he had free time, he would sit and learn diligently. And he had vast knowledge of Torah. This Rabbi Yochanan Dov was just a number of days before this incident that he came across a Rashi, also in the Masechta of Erchin, and it was a very difficult Rashi. He had a question on this Rashi. It bothered him very much. He couldn't figure out the answer to his question, and he approached the different Torah scholars, the greatest Torah scholars in his city, and nobody had an answer for him that he felt comfortable with. So when this young man walked in, he decided the way to test his Torah knowledge is, let me ask him this question. Let me see what he has to say about this question. So he tells him, I have a question on the Rashi, and this Masechta of Erchin. Let me tell you my question. Before he even had a chance to tell this young man what his question is, he said to him, wait a second. And the young man started to say outside, say Baal Peh, by heart, the Gemara, and he said word for word of what it's from the Gemara, then from the Rashi, the Mishnah. He spoke as if he was reading clearly out of a sefer. And then he explained the Rashi in such a beautiful way, such a deep but smooth way, that the question he had didn't even make sense anymore. In other words, it's not that he dealt with the question and gave an answer, he just explained the Gemara in such a way that the question was gone. And this Rabbi Yerucham Ber was literally amazed at his vast knowledge, how he knows the Gemara by heart, as if he's reading it from the Sefer inside. And his way of learning is so beautiful, so smooth, that this question that no one else had an answer for, here with this way of learning, the question doesn't even exist in the first place. Immediately there was this big commotion in Shul. Rabbi Yerucham Ber told all the people that this young man must be a great Torah scholar, because this is a question that I asked Rav Shmuel Nachum, the Parish. I asked Rav Zalman Yechiel, the Maggid Shir Gemara. I presented the question to Rav Pesach Ber, the Masnid, and all other Torah scholars, and nobody had an answer that I was comfortable with. And here this young man explained the Rashi in such a smooth way that my question didn't even begin to make sense. All the people in the shul hearing this, they all got excited, and they walked over to this young man, gave him Shalom Aleichem, and a Torah discussion began to open up between them. Rabbi Yosef Kolbe was sitting by his Gemara and learning, but when he saw that all these scholars were standing around a young man near the oven, and they were all listening to what he has to say, he decided to pick himself up and join the discussion. And there was a Torah discussion that lasted for many hours. And everyone standing there was very pleased, very impressed with his greatness. Even Rabbi Yosef Kolbe himself had nothing but praise for the Alter Rebbe. There was an individual by the name of Pinchas Reizes. He later became a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. But at this point he was not a chassid yet. And he was the son of Reb Henech Schick. Reb Henech Schick was actually the head of the Bezdin of this great city, Shklov. He came to Shul, and he noticed there was an unusual crowd, people that are never there this time, sitting by the table, Rabbi Yosef Kolbe, Rabbi Zalman Yechiel, the Pesach Ber, the Masnid, the Shmuel Nachum, the Parish, Rabbi Yerucham, the fisherman, and Rabbi Avram Shmaya, the quiet one. These were the titles I gave to these people. They're all sitting there, and there's a stranger there listening to the shir, someone who I never saw before. Rabbi Zalman Yechiel was the one that was giving the shir. His shir was well known as a very scholarly shir, very deep shir. And when he finished giving his shir, this young man, which was the new face that I did not recognize, he said that everything he said was beautiful, was very nice and very deep, but I have a different way of learning the Gemara. And again he did the same thing. He began to repeat what it says in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, in the commentaries, but he said everything by heart as if he was reading from a sefer. And the shir that this young man gave lasted for 3 hours. And again the same thing. He explained everything in such a smooth way, there was no need for questions, for debating, for dialogues. He explained it in such a smooth way that all the questions that the previous scholar brought in didn't even begin to exist. Rabbi Yosef Kolbe, who was the greatest Torah scholar in the community, he did not have enough words to praise this young man and to praise the way he teaches Torah. He said this way of learning is the true way of learning that literally opens and broadens the mind. The other way, with the questions and the answers and the pilpul and the dialogues, somehow the mind contracts. This opens the mind. However, on all the personal questions I asked him, where are you from? What is your function? What is your title? The young man didn't answer. All he said was, he's a Yeshiv Ayil, he studies Torah, but he has no official position anywhere. This was going on all night until finally, the earliest time possible, there was a minyan, they davened to the Sikkim, and after the davening, the guest made preparations to leave. Rabbi Yerucham Ber, the fisherman, was begging and pleading the guest that he should come to his house. And he didn't want to. And he said to him that if you're not going to come to my house, you should know this will cause me tremendous pain. You can't do this to me. And when he saw that it really bothered him so much, he finally agreed. So with great joy, Rabbi Yochanan Dov brought the guest to his house, and he brought him to that special room which was exclusively for Torah scholars. It was a room full of svarim, and it was exclusively for those Torah scholars. Shortly after this, word spread throughout the entire town about this great Torah scholar, what everybody had to say about him, and that even Rabbi Yosef Kolbai said that he's such a great person. And now he's staying in the room of Rabbi Yochanan Dov, in the exclusive room for the Torah scholars. And people from the city, especially the Torah scholars, began going to the house of Rabbi Yochanan Dov to meet this Torah scholar and to talk to him. Throughout the day, all the Torah scholars that came streaming to the room where this young man was, they all presented to him their questions and learning that they had, and everyone walked out extremely satisfied and excited for the answers that they got. The group of scholars that were there were the most incredible scholars in the entire city. They begged the young man that he should teach them and show them how he studies and how he learns this unusual approach of learning things in such a smooth way. And he sat there for a number of hours and told them and showed them his way of learning. There was a custom in the city of Shklov that if a famous Rav, or even an unknown individual, but he was a Torah scholar, especially a genius of a Torah scholar, a goyin, they would honor him in one way or another. They usually had a meeting in the house of the Av Bezdin, the head of the Bezdin, which was Reb Shik, and they would decide in what way to honor this rabbi, either by inviting him to say a pilpul, a Torah lecture in the big shul, or by just having a Torah discussion around the table in the house, in the private home of the Av Bezdin, or another way. So with this guest as well, they invited him at a meeting in the private home of the Av Bezdin, or Reb Shik, and they invited all the other Torah scholars of the city, and they had a Torah discussion till the late hours of the night. And all the Torah scholars that were there felt fortunate to be able to listen to the lumdus, to the Torah brilliance that was given over by this guest, but they were still puzzled as far as identity is concerned. Who is he, and where is he from? The following morning, the Zalman Yechiel, who was the one who normally would give the shir, it was on a Thursday, he saw that the guest was making preparations to leave again, and he begged him and he pleaded with him. He didn't rest until he convinced him that he should give the shir instead of the Zalman Yechiel himself. So after the davening, the guest gave the shir, which lasted for 5 hours. The Zalman Yechiel, the Pesach Ber the Masmid, and all the other scholars that participated in this shir were in absolute awe of his unique and unusual way of learning Torah. That evening, the guest finally left the city, and shortly afterwards, it was known that who was this guest? None other than the Alter Rebbe. This is just one example, but in this manner, the Alter Rebbe visited many of the Snagdisha cities and communities in this quiet way. And at this time, the Alter Rebbe formulated his approach and his line of action to be used in the future, which would eventually have such a massive effect on all of Lithuania, bringing tens of thousands of people closer to the teachings of Chassidus and becoming Chassidim. In this sense, the Alter Rebbe was different than the other students of the Maggid. The other students of the Maggid felt so negative about the Misnagdim, being that they were so full of hate and in such a severe way attacking the Maggid and Chassidus, that their approach was to totally dismiss them, have nothing to do with them, and just to make sure that they would be out of the way. The Alter Rebbe, on the other hand, felt very strongly that he knows the way that these people, if they would be reached the proper way, can actually become Chassidim themselves. And the Alter Rebbe felt that this was primarily by having the Chassidim, who themselves have great Torah knowledge of Nigla, the revealed part of Torah. This is the way they can communicate with the Jews in Lithuania, who are all Torah scholars and respected Torah knowledge. So in this way they can find an avenue of communication, and through this they can ultimately expose them to Chassidus and bring them to become Chassidim. But being that Alter Rebbe knew that his colleagues and the other students of the Maggid were against this approach, he shared this with three of those tzaddikim that were very close to him, Reb Nochem Chernobyl, Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchever, and Reb Zusha Anepola. And the Alter Rebbe explained to them that he is ready and he feels that he is able, with Mesiras Nefesh, to go and spread Chassidus in these circles. And he knew that it was Mesiras Nefesh, that the attacks that would be coming from the Misnagdisha circles. And as we know, how much the Alter Rebbe suffered later. But nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe was ready for this, and as we know, he ultimately succeeded. During this time period, the machlekes between the Chassidim and the Misnagdim constantly intensified, and finally in the year Tov Kuf Lamed Beis, which is 1772, it reached to a sort of a climax. There was an open debate in the city of Shklov whether or not Chassidus is a positive thing. And for this debate, the Mezritcher Maggid sent two people, the Alter Rebbe and the Avram Kaliska. They should be the ones to defend and show what Chassidus really is. The Alter Rebbe and Avram Kaliska were able to answer all the questions that the Misnagdim had. The only thing which remained unanswered was when they wanted to know why were there those Chassidim who acted in such a wild way. These were namely the followers of Avram Kaliska, that they did somersaults in the streets, they were verbally abusive to the Misnagdish Torah scholars, and they constantly offended them, and for this there was no real answer. So the Misnagdim looked at this as victory. They were victorious of the debate, and this is what they notified the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. And as a result of this, the Vilna Gaon and other Misnagdim signed a declaration where they came out with the most horrible announcements and expressions and phrases against the Chassidim. And this was done on the 8th of Nisan, Tov Kuf Lamed Beis. And at the same time, someone else printed a pamphlet which was called Zamir Oritzin. Also, thousands and thousands of these pamphlets spread out was full of hate and full of abuse against the leaders of Chassidus and the Chassidic movement. The students of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid saw that they cannot any longer go on with their work. They have to get together and decide what to do. So Levi Yitzchak Berditchever, at that time, he was the Rav in the city of Pinsk. And in the city there was a tremendous machlekes broke out, where there were people who were Misnagdim, and they were fighting against the Mezritcher Maggid, against Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchever. And especially when they heard about this meeting, they had more strength to fight against the Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchever. And that's when Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchever left and went to the Mezritch. When he left, what did the people in the city do? They took another person to become the Rav of the city in his place. His name was Rebbe Avigdor. This is the individual who later was the one to inform against the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe should Chas v'Shalom be executed. And as a result of that, we have the Yontif of Yutas Kislev. This new Rav was afraid that Rebbe Levi Yitzchak would come back and demand his position, which halachically belonged to him. So what did he do? He tormented Rebbe Levi Yitzchak's family and forced them to leave their home. and to do this before Rebbe Yitzchak returns. And in that way, Rebbe Yitzchak won't be able to return. The family, after suffering so much, finally sent a letter to Rebbe Yitzchak to let him know what was going on. Rebbe Yitzchak told his colleagues, the other students of the Mezritcher Magid, of what is going on, and they decided that on Shabbos, during the Suda, they're going to read the letter that Rebbe Yitzchak's family sent him of how they were tormented and how much they suffered by the Misnagdim. They would read this in the presence of the Magid and see what he would say. That's what happened. Shabbos by the Suda, they were all sitting there, and one of them read this letter. But the Mezritcher Magid didn't even respond. When Shabbos was over, the students got together to decide what to do. And they finally came to the conclusion that the only thing that can be done is, being that the Misnagdim are coming out with declarations to excommunicate the Chassidim, and what they did was definitely against halacha. It was all based on lies and fabrications and deceptions. Therefore, halachically, the right thing to do, when someone is executed, excommunicated in a way which is against halacha, to only do that in return. And especially this new Rav in the city of Pinsk, this Rebbe Vigda, he surely deserves to be excommunicated. So at this meeting of the students of the Magid, there were 9 students, and the Alter Rebbe was supposed to be the 10th, but he wasn't part of that meeting. In fact, the other students were concerned, and they knew the Alter Rebbe so much always tried to find the schus, the merit, the way of defending the Misnagdim, that perhaps he wouldn't want to participate in this. And especially that they read this in front of the Magid, and the Magid didn't respond, that there'd be more of a reason why the Alter Rebbe wouldn't want to partake in this act of putting the Misnagdim in excommunication. So what they did was, one of the students asked the Alter Rebbe, without telling him what they decided, just they asked the question, what would be the halacha in a case like this where Misnagdim excommunicate someone against halacha? And the Alter Rebbe said, the halacha is that they should be excommunicated. And when that happened, they said to Alter Rebbe, if that's the case, we want you to participate in what we're doing here. And they did it. We don't know the details exactly what happened and what they did, but basically, they came out with something against the students, against the Misnagdish Rabbonim, who came out with excommunication. That night, when the students of the Magid went to sleep, Alter Rebbe also went to sleep, but he didn't really sleep. He was just lying in his bed, because he knew that the Mezritcher Magid definitely knew what they did, and he was sure there would be some results from this. Something would happen. And sure enough, Alter Rebbe heard the footsteps of the Mezritcher Magid, and he pretended that he was sleeping. The Magid had a candle in his hand, and with the candle he walked over and looked into the face of every one of his students that was sleeping. And when he came to the Alter Rebbe, and he looked into the Alter Rebbe's face with his candle, the Magid said, as if he was saying to himself, this little Yid is going to be the Rav in all of Russia. When they heard the Magid speak, that's when the students woke up. And also the Alter Rebbe pretended that he just woke up. And the Magid said to them, tell me, my children, what did you do tonight? And the students told him that it was just absolutely impossible to suffer from the Misnagdim the way we did, and therefore we did whatever it was that he did. So the Magid said to them, you should know that by what you did, you lost your head. Which he meant to say, this is going to lead to the histalkus, to the passing of the Magid. What you've gained, though, is that from now on, in all the machlokes and all the arguments between the Chassidim and Misnagdim, Yad HaChassidim Ala Al-Yena. The Chassidim will always come out on top. It was Shabbos Pashas Vayishlach, Tov Kuf Lamed Gimel, 1773. This was the last Shabbos of the Mezritcher Magid Ba'al Madain. And the Maggid, lying in bed, in the presence of the Chavraya Kadisha of all the students, he said words of Chassidus on the Pasuk, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. After Ma'ariv and Havdalah, the Maggid spoke on the Haftorah of that Shabbos, which begins with the words, Chazain Evadja. And he gave over words of Chassidus and explained Chazain Evadja. On Sunday, it was the 17th of Kislev, the Mezritcher Maggid said to the Alter Rebbe personally that 3 days before his Talkus, by Tzaddikim, they see the Dvar Havaya, they see the words of Hashem that are in every physical object, which means they see the godliness in it visually. And that night, the Alter Rebbe said, the Mezritcher Maggid told him how one is supposed to conduct himself on the night before a bris. And after the Mezritcher Maggid told the Alter Rebbe the details of what one is supposed to do the night of a bris, the Mezritcher Maggid said to Alter Rebbe, why don't you ask me what's supposed to be done at a Shalom Zacha? So the Alter Rebbe answered, I feel that what the Rebbe is telling me now is something which is Isrusa de Leila. It's something which comes from above, and I really cannot ask any questions. I cannot really have any input into this, just be a passive recipient. The Mezritcher Maggid nodded with his head to indicate that this was correct. It was a heavenly gift. But then he revealed to him what should be done during the actual bris itself, and what should be done during the Shalom Zacha. And he said to him, Chazain Evadja means the Oived Ka, the one who serves Hashem, sees, meaning sees the future. You will have a son, and you should name him after me. The night before the bris, which is Leil Shimurim, that night you'll remember everything I told you, and you'll remember and you'll remind others everything that I said to you on this night. And so it was, a year later, on the 9th day of Kislev, the Mezritcher Maggid was nostalgic on the 19th of Kislev. This was a year later, on the 9th of Kislev, the first child was born to the Alter Rebbe, and he named him Dov Ber. And he grew up to be the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad. This discussion took place on Sunday. 3 days later, on Yutas Kislev, was the actual Istalkus of the Mezritcher Maggid in the city of Anapola. There was a disagreement between the Chaver Kadisha of that city and the students of the Mezritcher Maggid, who would be the ones to do the Tara of the Mezritcher Maggid. Who would have that chus? The Chaver Kadisha said that this is their function in the city. It was the city of Anapola. And the Mezritcher Maggid students said that they were the ones who served their Rebbe throughout his entire life, so they're the ones to do it now. There was a din Torah, and the verdict was, the psak din was, that this belongs to the Chavraya Kadisha, this belongs to the students of the Mezritcher Maggid. They drew lots to know which one of the students would be doing the Torah on which part of the holy body of the Mezritcher Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe, he was zeicher to the holy head of the Maggid. The Alter Rebbe said that being that tzaddikim are greater after their passing than during their lifetime, the Alter Rebbe said will allow the Mezritcher Maggid to table himself. And that's what happened. The Mezritcher Maggid tabled himself 3 times. The Mendel Haraduke was the greatest student of the Mezritcher Maggid, said that from the fact that the Alter Rebbe was zeicher to the head of the Maggid, shows that even though all the students took so much from the Maggid, he took the deepest and the most of the Mezritcher Maggid. In his words, we all received from the same wellspring, and we received from the source of the wellspring. But most of us received from Makif the Makif, and the Alter Rebbe received the Makif and the Pnimius the Pnimius.